thank you very much, the panel, for coming along. My name is Robert Seibert and I'm a non-executive director for Hempen CBD Media. What that means is I interfere a lot with Hempen CBD Media as a company, which is, we know, has got the show, the expo, it's got the magazine, and we also have our media company, and our media company is here today filming this discussion. This discussion comes at a timely point because I know that Hempen, for example, have had some issues with regards to their licensing, and so we're going to be discussing hemp farming in the UK. So if you could introduce yourselves one at a time, that would be great. We're going to start with you, Ali.
Yeah, I'm Ali Silk. I am a member of Hempen Cooperative. I personally look after the marketing, but as we're a cooperative, we all are involved in all aspects of the business, so I'm very happy to be here and representing.
Thank you.
My name's Jappie Bartley from UYNTE Hemp. I'm the operations director, and we're cultivating hemp up in Leicestershire this year.
Excellent.
I'm Rebekah, Shaman. I founded the British Hemp Association to remove the barriers that are stopping industrial hemp flourishing here in the UK.
My name is Robert Jappie. I'm head of cannabis law at Mackrell, Garrett, and we're the UK's only dedicated cannabis law department.
Excellent. So if I could just kick off then with you, Rebekah, could you just explain to us what the current situation with hemp farming in the UK is?
Okay, so you can apply for a licence from the government. It's a 3-year licence and it's to grow industrial hemp. There is exclusions to that licence, so we can only harvest and process the fibre or the seed. It's prohibited to do anything with the leaf or the flower. In fact, they have to be destroyed on the field. And the licence is getting harder and harder to obtain from the Home Office, and there's a lot of restrictions on to where you can grow the hemp, exclusion areas around the hemp, and you need to have a DBS check if you want to grow hemp as well. So there's a lot of barriers that are actually stopping farmers from wanting to grow hemp, even though it's legal to grow 0.2% THC hemp.
Okay. And Robert, from your perspective then, from the legal point of view, what's the current situation there? Is there any movement or change, or has anything been happening that you've heard of? Or?
Well, I mean, it is difficult to get licences, you're absolutely right. So dealing with the Home Office can be quite frustrating and it does require a lot of patience. From an economic point of view, it seems very restrictive in terms of the conditions that are placed upon cultivators. So having to throw away half your plant, if not the best part of your plant, is very frustrating. I would like to see those restrictions loosened, but I don't know if that's on the cards anytime soon.
Okay. Because I read an article as I was coming down on the train today that drew a comparison about the amount of hectares that we grow in this country in terms of industrial hemp compared to Europe, and there's a considerable difference, isn't there? A massive difference, in fact. I mean, we're talking about in terms of hundreds of thousands of more acres being grown. So there's clearly a potential market here in the UK that I think we need to look at. Now, you've been growing hemp in the UK, I understand, Ali?
Yeah, that's
right.
So
tell us about the situation that you've currently got at the moment.
Well, so we did at Hempen hold a licence for the previous 3 years, and in December last year put in our application for renewal for the following 3 years, and it wasn't until July, several weeks ago, that we finally got a Home Office response 7 months after putting in our application for a 2 to 4 week application process, that they wouldn't renew our licence. So we had been told during that process earlier in the year, sort of January, February, to proceed as normal on the assumption that we'd get our licence for seed and stalk. So, you know, the seeds went in the ground early June so that we could be ready for harvest. Which means that we had to unfortunately destroy the plants that we had in the farm, in the field, in order to sort of stay on the right side of the law and to have any chance of going through the appeals process and being successful at the other end. So what's been really frustrating is that the Home Office clearly doesn't have any real understanding of farming, because, you know, they've come to us mid-season basically, and that means that a farmer loses their entire yield. So
yeah, a very frustrating situation for
really
you guys, clearly, isn't it?
Yeah.
What sort of advice and guidance, or what experience have you had from any of your clients with regards to renewal of licence? Have you had any experience of that at all, Robert?
I mean, the hemp licence, the level of engagement from the Home Office, once the licence is granted, seems to be quite poor. You know, you can ask them for things and you're supposed to have a quick turnaround, and you know, you're supposed to be able to engage with them on issues, and there's very little response, or they'll come back to you and ask you the same questions over and over again, phrased slightly differently. So after a while, you stop bothering, I think. I think people just say, well, I'm not getting any sort of coherent feedback, I'm just going to carry on. Everything seems to be fine. And then to have the rug pulled out from under you like that, without any engagement process, without any notice, it's not good for business, and it's not good for the industry as a whole.
What do we think? Capacity, capability issues with the Home Office? Where do we think that's going, Jamie? You got any thoughts on that?
Potentially. I mean, I think all of the government sectors have had other focuses on their mind as well, talking to various different regulators, and they've all been preparing for the B word as such as well. But equally, I think there probably is a lack of resources. There's an increase in applications, I should imagine, over the last two years especially. Our own experiences, our first licence probably took 3.5 months to be granted. Our second licence application, to be fair, was a lot quicker. I think we'd learnt a lot from the questions that were being asked in the first application, so our second licence was granted in 8 weeks from application.
Yeah. Okay, so challenges for the marketplace then. So we're all agreed that, you know, we think there's a massive opportunity here within the UK for the growing of industrial hemp. Absolutely, I don't think anybody disagree with that.
Yep.
What challenges have we got, and what barriers have we got to break down? Rebekah, would you like to start with that?
Well, the biggest barrier, I believe, is the actual Home Office licence if you're growing for industrial products. So hemp is an amazing environmental tool that is completely being ignored in the discourse. And it's an amazing remediation tool. It cleans up toxic soils, it sequesters carbon from the atmosphere, and then you turn the crop, once it's grown, into sustainable products that biodegrade. So as a future crop for environmental and sustainable, environmentally friendly products, hemp really is a no-brainer for the future. So without any support or acknowledgement of that environmental benefits, we're not really being able to look at it from that side. So there's no subsidies, there's no support. It's not really looked at as an agricultural crop, it's looked at as a controlled substance. And when you apply for the Home Office licence, you're actually applying for it because it's considered a controlled substance. So if you want to grow for hempcrete or you want to grow for bioplastics, you actually can't go to DEFRA and say, we want to grow this crop for this product that we can grow and then industrially make and process. We need to go to the Home Office, get a controlled licence in order to then grow for hempcrete, even though no one's digesting the crop. It's not being utilised by humans in any way. And I think that this is the biggest, one of the biggest barriers. And I think the second barrier is, as Robert Jappie just very clearly said, if you're destroying the leaf and the flower, you're destroying half the plant. And at this moment in time, there's more of a demand for the flower and the leaf with CBD than there is for, bioplastics. There's more investment in it. Yeah. And what we need to do is start getting more investment into the hemp industry to then be able to funnel some of that investment into R&D and looking at growing hemp with research and development and working with universities. But while it's stuck in this upstream with a Home Office licence, I think it's very, very difficult for farmers to take it seriously as a crop for the future.
So is it a lack of understanding from DEFRA? Do you think they don't see the whole picture of the hemp plant, or do you think it's a capacity issue?
I think at the moment it's not really in DEFRA's remit, so I think that's one of the issues, is that DEFRA don't have much say-so on the crop at the moment. Yeah. Equally, I think it's more, some of the barriers are really the industrial sectors that still have an aversion to the word hemp or cannabis, and there's still a reaction that you get from people when you use those words. That, I think, probably produces some barriers potentially. Certainly some of the carbon-intense sectors that we're looking at for end-use products, that's one of the biggest barriers is to break down, is their connotations to what the plant is and where it's come from. It's
the classic, as soon as you use the word cannabis, people recoil a little bit, don't they? And they don't. It's about educating the marketplace and the consumer about actually the wider uses of the plant. Yeah. And I think that's where, in my personal opinion, we use CBD, some love it or loathe it, as a vehicle on that journey. I mean, because let's face it, in the last sort of 18 months, CBD has, it's captured the imagination of the consumer. It's normalised cannabis to a certain extent as well. And maybe that's the route that we need to go down to ensure that this journey towards the wider use of the plant is used. So we use CBD as that vehicle. What do you think about that?
I think yes, it's a great thing to leverage. I think what's important to remember is that CBD is just one aspect of this amazing plant. Even when it comes to the flowers, that CBD is just one compound that's hugely beneficial. So while we're doing that education piece, it really needs to be about the whole plant, the full spectrum, all of the cannabinoids when it comes to medicinal or sort of well-being use. It's just such a complicated area, and it's really hard to talk to people about. And it's, CBD as a product is so complex in terms of, different people's dosage and, amounts and milligrams and all this sort of thing. So it's such a minefield that it's quite hard to standardise and sort of really help people understand, particularly while we've got our hands tied in talking about any particular medical benefits or, that sort of thing.
I know you've got some feelings about CBD and hemp and putting those two together, Rebekah.
Well, I've been in the industry since 2006, and I've seen a massive change in the hemp industry from 2006, and the biggest change has been CBD, in the fact that it's taken hemp out of this very kind of hippie identity to a quite a serious plant in the marketplace. So I think it's what it's done is it's increased hemp status, and actually it's opened it up to a much broader and wider audience, because for health and well-being it is really important for us to be ingesting cannabinoids, and hemp provides the best concentration of cannabinoids that humans need. And actually hemp is our best friend in the plant world. Dogs and horses are our best friend in the animal world, but hemp is our best friend in the plant world, because she's so much like us. And she's great for the environment, she's great for human health, and her aim is to bring everything back into homeostasis, to bring everything back into balance. And without having cannabinoids and being able to feed our immune systems using CBD, we're seeing a massive decrease in health and well-being. At the same time, and that's why we're seeing a massive increase in people wanting to consume CBD. And at the same time, this is also opening up a whole area around hemp as a industrial and agricultural crop. So I couldn't have been having this conversation with you 10 years ago. No. It wouldn't have happened, and now it's happened. But I also think what's happening in the rest of the world is everyone else is getting on to the cannabis train, and it's whether Britain is going to get on that train while it's stuck in the station, or whether that train's going to go off, because most of Asia have now, South America and North America are removing all their barriers to grow hemp and cannabis. And what we're seeing is a massive increase in jobs and job creation, tax money coming in, R&D, manufacturing, everything that the government kind of needs here if we go into a post-Brexit scenario. And so by keeping these barriers in place, it's not really serving anybody but and keeping an industry that could definitely help England crippled.
So what do we want for the future, Jamie?
I think, again, more education across a broad range of sectors around what the hemp can be used for and the different constituents. There's so many beneficial products that can really be focused on. We don't just have to focus on the existing products. There's future products that potentially be used as well, supercapacitors from the hemp shiv. There's going to be an enormous requirement for fast charging batteries for electric cars, phones, tablets as we move forwards. We can produce that out of a crop we can grow every 120 or in a 120-day cycle, rather than out of coal that's obviously got a finite limit to it. So I think from my point of view, it's really education and mass production. I mean, we produced 1.8 million tonnes of petrochemical plastics in the UK last year. So for us to provide a viable alternative, we need to have large volumes of polylactic acid produced from the hemp shiv to be able to provide that to those manufacturers.
So, yeah, a little bit Tony Blair, aren't we, with education. But it's true, though, isn't it? I think that, if there's one thing I do agree with Tony Blair about, that I think that education is absolutely critical, not just for the UK's education system, but also for this issue that we're suffering from today in terms of the hemp plant. It's how do we achieve that then? How are we going to move from this point forward so that we can produce hemp on a mass scale? What's the plan? What's the British Hemp Association's plan? How are you going to lobby this? How are you going to put pressure on the appropriate people? What can we do then as advocates of the plant to support that, as growers, as people like me who's just a standalone advocate? What do we do?
Well, I think that one of the biggest problems is that the hemp industry is very small. So people who are involved in the hemp industry are doing it for the love of the hemp, not really for the love of the money. And so it's about getting a strong enough voice for to put pressure on government to recognise the economic benefits, the job creation benefits, and the environmental benefits that hemp can bring to England in a post-Brexit scenario. And I think that's a really important way of educating even the government on the potential for a hemp industry here in the UK as a massive also creation of jobs and revitalising up north, like Jamie said, graphene, and there's lots of products that can be made from hemp that could really revitalise decimated communities that don't have anything. They don't know where to put their energies. So it's education, it's connecting, and it's lobbying. For me, for the British Hemp Association, it's those three things. It's educating people to get on board and recognise the importance of hemp and start demanding it, especially British grown hemp. Because what we're going to see is that in 2018 the Hemp Farm Bill was passed in America, and this year they are growing thousands and thousands of acres of hemp, industrial hemp, for many different applications. So we're going to see very soon massive imports in hemp products. And unless we start a domesticated market here very quickly in the UK, we are not going to be able to compete in any kind of marketplace. And so it's really important that the British government also recognise what's going on outside of England and United Kingdom, and start actually recognising what's happening in the rest of the world, and realising that everyone is moving on from the this discourse of THC discourse in regards to hemp, and removing those barriers so that we can start and also and opening it up. So we get a lot of farmers that want to grow hemp, but with all the restrictions in place, there's no incentive. And what we need is many more incentives, and we need to get as many people on as possible as individual supporters or companies that are involved in hemp to come together to create a strong enough lobbying group to then start putting pressure on the government to recognise all the benefits that hemp can bring.
Okay. First regulations that need to change, Robert. What do we need to do?
Well, I think something that has to happen is businesses have to start taking action. So if someone like Hempen, they've been dealing with the Home Office, they've been treated badly, don't just settle for it, take them to court. You know, fight the case, appeal the case, get a decision in your favour. It's the sort of test cases like that. Nobody wants to be a test case, and you've drawn the short straw in that respect.
It has a positive outcome then.
Yeah, absolutely. But you push back, you get a court decision in your favour, the Home Office then has to go away and start changing their policies or changing the regulations. And that's the difficulty with the hemp industry and the CBD sector in particular. It's very new. So in terms of actual established test cases, judgments from the High Court, there isn't any. But nobody wants to be the first. That's the unfortunate thing.
Absolutely. And
someone's going to have to take up the mantle and do it, because there's real potential here, and the UK is in danger of being left behind. And it's the government policy is so hypocritical. They'll hand out THC licenses to big companies who will then grow all of this marijuana, export it overseas, and they won't allow people to use the whole hemp plant here in the UK for products. It
is a bit of a crazy situation, isn't it?
So you need a joined up approach from business, from the industry. Let's take the fight to them. Let's change the laws so that they benefit the industry and allow more access to products for consumers.
And how helpful do we think visits like that was just conducted by David Lammy and Sir Norman Lamb, going across to Canada and having a look and coming back and then writing in the Telegraph about their findings of how we should legalise cannabis? How helpful do we think that is? Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, I think any sort of detail and education and experiences from across the board, anyone in every walk of life, if they can be going and talking to other people about their experiences and their feelings, and if that's going to move the industry forwards, I think that's a great thing. Certainly, I think more MPs, more politicians should be aware of it. They're probably maybe not as educated about some of the benefits as the industry is, really. So the more we can get that message clearly across to them, and they can go and see it with their own eyes, I think that's only going to move everything forwards longer term.
I think it's important, though, to make sure that the learnings are represented across all different types of organisations. So what we see is people, politicians and big business come back from the States or Canada and get very excited in this new industry and then jump in, and they're sort of given right of way or precedence over, smaller farmers. There could be farmers all over the country of different scales. But often they're the ones that are struggling the most. So it's legislation change is the most important thing. What's really frustrating to watch is that the government is promising sovereignty from the EU. We're going to pull out Britain. We're going to stand on our own 2 feet, and yet everything that they're doing with regards to hemp farming is completely the opposite of that. So everything will be imported. Hemp. Most of the hemp oil seeds and so on the market already are with regards to CBD. Everything is imported.
I understand that one of the directors or leads from the Centre for Medical Cannabis has just moved across into Boris Johnson's office.
Right.
So I'm hoping that's a positive indication that things might change. What's your opinion on that, Robert?
I think the political will is firmly behind further legalisation and opening up the industry. The problem is cannabis still has a stigma, so it's not a big vote winner. So who are we trying to convince here? It's the Daily Mail reading, Conservative voting people of Middle England, my parents basically, and they're only just coming around to the idea of medicinal cannabis, and I think public support is quite strongly behind that. But they're still terribly frightened at the thought of recreational cannabis, and even a hemp product, a CBD product, they don't get it. So I think that's the issue. I think a cross-party delegation going to Canada shows that there is a lot of agreement in Parliament as to allowing this industry to continue and to flourish. It's not a big vote winner to come out and say, right, we're going to legalise everything, we're going to open up the hemp industry, the marijuana industry. So I think that needs to change. You've got to think about who it is you're trying to convince here.
I think one of the changes that has to be made as well is more research. I think because through research we have better education, and we're standing by data and information which is validated correctly, and that would give the consumer far more confidence. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very much so. I think testing's key, data's key. I know Rebekah's done some previous research with universities. We're undertaking research this year, and it's really about having factually correct data that you can show the industry and say, this is what it can do. We're looking at, with Cranfield University, how we can increase following on crop yields by using hemp in a crop rotation, because it will help with the soil compaction and therefore increase the attenuation of the soil capacity, and therefore potentially increasing yields for follow-on crops. So that sort of data is really key for us to be able to show to people. It's not just hearsay, it's not just a few people have said this is what it can do. It's like, here's the science, here is the results that show that this is absolutely what it can do. So, I mean, we're certainly collecting a lot of data this year, as much as we can. We've got 5 different cultivars in the ground for that reason, so we can understand the difference in yields, in densities, and therefore how much fibre and how much shiv we can take from the different cultivars, which ultimately allows us to scale accurately.
And do you think the UK can realistically, with our changeable climate, be a leader in the hemp market?
I'm not sure about be a leader. I'm competing against China, we're competing against America that has got massive land mass. I mean, we have a very small land mass, but what we can do is create a domesticated hemp industry that supports British farming and supports British industry, and it's about educating people to support British industry and British farming, and I think that's the most important thing. But no, we can't compete against China, and also because we're already 2 years behind America and China. Well, China's been doing it for thousands of years, but we're already 2 years behind America.
And then you put all those restrictions on the licence as well, and then you hamstring the industry.
They're completely crippling any chance of us getting anywhere. We have universities desperately wanted to do R&D. There's no lack of enthusiasm for research, for R&D, even for investment. But while it sits politically as a poison chalice, and that's why DEFRA, no one really knows what to do with it, because no one really wants to touch it, because it's just so tainted by the past discourse around it and how it's moving so quickly forward, and politicians don't really know how to change their perspective so quickly, because it's been just such a quick change. I mean, CBD came on the market in 2013, 2014, and I mean, how quick has this product just kind of grabbed the imagination, alongside a lot of recreational cannabis and the removal of restrictions of cannabis in America. And I think that has massively speeded up this whole discussion very quickly, because whereas in America 10 years ago you were put in jail for smoking it, now it's legalized in many states, and very soon it will be legalized throughout most of America, I believe. So
that might be a real opening, is when the US finally changes their federal prohibition.
Yes.
Because then the banks can get involved, and then investors can get involved, and businesses will be more willing to take that step into an unknown sector. So yeah, the federal prohibition
can't be that far off, really, though, can it? Because I mean, the state by state, it's knocking down slowly but surely, isn't it? Yeah.
You know, how long can the US federal government keep up this pretense that they are still complying with their UN obligations to prohibit the sale and supply of cannabis, when you've got some form of legal cannabis in 34 states now, 35 states, something like that? It's embarrassing.
Yeah, and I read today that Luxembourg have just relaxed their cannabis laws. You were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think they actually had a public vote, didn't they, a few months ago, which is a really good topic to have a referendum on, by the way. That's what a referendum should be for. Simple yes or no. Yeah. So again, it looks like they are doing the right thing, like Canada did. Take your time, do some planning, have a plan in case you do get a yes vote. It's always handy, and do it the right way. So I think it's great news for the EU. Let's see how Luxembourg gets on. You'll have loads of other countries wanting to follow. You've got virtual decriminalisation of all drugs in places like Portugal and Spain. Why wouldn't you legalise part of the sector anyway? Get those tax revenues, job creation.
Protect consumers as well with the tax.
Absolutely. It's a no-brainer.
It was interesting, a conversation we had earlier at lunch, wasn't it, where you mentioned, I forget his name now, your colleague who had come up with the concept of prohibition had gone the other way.
Yeah, no, it's actually not my colleague. It's a chap called Tim Henley. He works for Namaste Technologies, and he runs the Extract, which is a great website, so shout out to Tim. He had an idea, what if in the 1930s, rather than this global prohibition on cannabis being enforced upon everybody, they'd actually prohibited alcohol globally, and cannabis had always been allowed to be legal. So you'd have this whole society where we're all wearing hemp clothes and living in hemp houses, and come home at the end of the day and smoke a joint rather than have a cold beer. And it would be interesting to see how society would have developed if it had gone that way rather than the way it did.
Well, it's interesting because the Bureau of Narcotics that were illegalising alcohol when the prohibition ended, they needed to find something else to demonise, and so they changed it to the DEA, Drugs Enforcement Agency, and they chose cannabis.
There you go.
And so everyone
as
that
its
was
first one to kind of pick off, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I believe it was one of the first kind of PR campaigns to brainwash people into understand, because media had just come out, films, newspapers, television, mass kind of marketing and psychology, and so they just did a fantastic job of just really just demonizing this plant. And the American Medical Association had no idea that marijuana was cannabis, and so there was a whole kind of confusion over what was marijuana, what was cannabis, what was hemp, and in 1937 the Marijuana Tax Act came out, but of course all the hemp farmers were caught up in the crossfire because you couldn't tell the difference between the hemp and the cannabis, and so that basically just completely destroyed the market. And actually the DEA spent more money destroying feral hemp crops than they did with anything else that they did.
Incredible, wasn't it?
Because they had to go and
so I'm not stealing Tim's idea, but it would be
it would be good. Yeah, right.
It would be great.
So just for the record, we're copywriting a film. It's not your idea anymore, Tim. We're very sorry. So what's great about hemp farming? Tell me what's good about it.
Oh, everything. I mean, a plant that can clean the soil, that can capture carbon from the air, that can provide hugely nutritious food, high protein levels, so many different products. Why is that not wonderful? I mean, it's such an incredible plant to be in the field of as well, the smell and the colours and the beauty of it. It's just such a lovely plant to be working with.
Jamie?
I think, I mean, very much so, as Ali's just said there. I mean, it's a great plant. I think also the fact that it's so robust. I mean, it really does. When you see it in the fields and you see some of the weather it's come from, and if you think of some of the weather we've had this year, we've had the hottest day on record, followed by 2 days of storms, pretty much. And a lot of the other crops, you're driving around the countryside, and a lot of the other agricultural crops, they're flattened in the fields. I mean, the farmers have had a really, really hard time. The hemp's absolutely standing strong for it all. So when you then weigh that up and you think about the impact that weather can have on the agricultural sector and how much of a commercial impact that can have on them, and then you have such a robust crop that if we really get the infrastructure in place to draw the true value from, it can stand up to so much in our climate as well.
And if a general farmer had that in his business model, that would help with the disaster of some of the other crops.
Very much so, it'd help balance it. I mean,
yeah.
And you get the environmental benefits too. If you grow it as on a crop rotation basis, say for instance removing oilseed rape uses no end of pesticides to allow it to cultivate and to grow well. Those pesticides go into our groundwater. The water boards spend millions and millions of pounds a year trying to clean up that groundwater, more carbon going into the atmosphere, which is just to get it down to safe levels for us to drink in our drinking water, for UK drinking water standards. Well, if we just look at replacing an oilseed crop rape with hemp and using the oils for biodiesels, for technical oils, there's all sorts of different products you can utilise it for. But suddenly you've just removed that requirement for pesticides in the agricultural cycle as well. That would have an enormous overnight impact on the UK's groundwater condition.
What's great about hemp farming?
Just have to go into a hemp field. You just smell it and you feel great. It's because it's doing so good for the so much good for the environment, for humans. It's our best friend. Tap roots go 3 meters down, sucking up all those bad nutrients that are much harder to get from other roots. The fibrous root binds the topsoil. You get loads of insects. And it only grows in the summer, so you can cut it down and grow your winter crops. And it's a summer cycle. So it's a really robust plant. And it was illegal not to grow hemp in the UK in the 1500s. Under Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, you had to grow one root, which was 1/4 of an acre of your land, had to be hemp. And it was so valuable that you could pay your taxes with it. And this was because at that time, colonising other countries and exploring other countries, you needed a strong navy, and hemp basically built our British Empire through the navy. So hemp rope and hemp canvas. So canvas comes from the word cannabis because it's the only seafaring fabric, doesn't dissolve in seawater. So we've had a long history of hemp here in the UK. In fact, hemp dominated as a plant right up until its prohibition. The Napoleonic Wars were fought over hemp between the Russian, the French and the English, and who controlled the hemp supply. Obviously, England had to go to the Commonwealth because we didn't have enough land.
But can we send this recording to the EU Working Group on Novel Foods?
Pre-1997
consumption.
It's the British Empire, isn't it?
It is the British Empire. It is indeed the British Empire.
It's interesting because I was going to say about, you've kind of hit where I was going to go with the next point, really. It was, if we were going to give a message now, what would your message be to DEFRA, to the MHRA, to the consumer? What final messages, what would you want to get across now?
Not to underestimate the benefits that we could be reaping from this plant. To change the legislation to free us up to use the whole plant, which would just change the landscape entirely, so that we could financially support the rest of the industry. That's really important. And I think to UK consumers to put pressure on, to keep buying the products, to demand transparency and to understand the origin, to want to be able to get hemp from the UK, much as we would love to get our veg and meat from local sources, to join us to keep putting pressure on to make those changes.
Jamie?
Yes, again, I mean, Ali's hitting the nail on the head there. I think there's got to be changes to prevent us being held back. At the moment, we already are on, as we've covered already, we're already on a backwards step by a year or two from the States. Everything is going to be imported soon, and the industry will just get pushed away and pushed away. Ultimately, it shouldn't be all about price, but consumers are going to be led by price as well. So unless we allow things to happen cost effectively here and to really happen on a larger scale, which needs investment into infrastructure in quite a large way, that allows the commercial return then to go back to the farmers. it's a crop that, given the right end uses and with the right infrastructure in place, doesn't need any subsidies to support it at all. There's not many crops that can offer that at the moment in the UK agricultural sector. So I think really it's an awakening and an awareness of what can be done and to actually make those changes, because if those changes don't happen, we're going to be having this same conversation in 12 months, 24 months, and keep going down the line, and sooner or later the conversation will die, unfortunately.
Core message then. What's the core message from the BHA?
We're in the middle of a mass climate change, and it's desperate that we start looking at the way we consume and the way we utilise products. And at the moment, there's an overconsumption of products that are just not biodegradable, not supporting the earth, not supporting the soil. And hemp is a fantastic, viable solution for some of the huge environmental issues that we're facing. It has always been in our history in England, and we have always used it right up to the prohibition. And by enabling the industry to thrive, by removing the barriers to growth, by putting hemp back into DEFRA so that we can start looking at it as an agricultural crop, to start looking at the environmental benefits and promoting British grown domestic hemp, and enabling the British people to get involved. I mean, we get so many people asking us to grow hemp. They want to grow hemp. Loads and loads of small farmers want to grow hemp. There's a real demand, there's a real hunger for it. So, and they reducing those barriers to growth and letting the hemp industry self-regulate, trusting that we want the best for hemp, we want the best for the people, and giving us that opportunity to enable an industry that is so desperately needed here in the UK, especially post-Brexit, to really thrive and to get on board of the hemp boat that's sailing around the rest of the world.
I think Jack Herrera said, didn't he, that I'm not saying that hemp can save the world, I'm just saying it's the only plant that can. I think that was his famous quote. And have you any final points, Robert?
Just that I think, listening to these guys speak for 20 minutes, you can see how ridiculous all these restrictions and prohibitions actually are when you've got a crop that is so positive in so many ways. I think the industry needs a really joined up approach. We need to unite and take the fight to the regulators. If they're going to try and restrict such a positive business, then you have to take them on.
And I just want to close with thanking you all for coming down today. And, it would be our honour if you would come down to the Hempen CBD Expo and continue to push this message. And because I think you are all a force for change. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.